Welcome to the Find Your Leadership Confidence podcast with Vicki Noethling. You are about to discover impactful lessons that help you grow as an individual, grow your confidence, and find the positive and good within you, so you powerfully and authentically become the best version of yourself. Be sure you visit our website at www.findyourleadershipconfidence.com. While you're there, subscribe to us via your favorite network. Now tune in, get ready, and enjoy the journey of emerging as a leader of exception in the 21st century.
Welcome, everyone, to the Find Your Leadership Confidence podcast. I'm your host, Vicki Noethling, coming to you from Roswell, Georgia. The goal of this podcast is to bring topics and guests that will empower you to become that confident leader and take your business and your life to the next level. Today, I am excited to be chatting with Steve McCready, and let me tell you just a little bit about him. Building on his experience as a psychotherapist and his extensive study of the human brain, personal growth, and personal performance, Steve McCready is a coach who helps solo and small business owners make a bigger impact in their world. So we're going to delve a little deeper to that. And I loved this theme that Steve suggested, which is how to keep your feelings from driving you without stuffing them in the trunk. And I guess for some people, you need to have one of those 1970 or 80s Cadillacs with the big trunk.
For sure. Yeah, it might have to be kind of a big trunk anyway, but that's not where we want to put them anyway. So it's not a problem.
Awesome. All right. So welcome, Steve. And I always start out with a very easy question, and that is just tell everybody, what part of the country do you call home? Where do you live?
Yeah, I am in Sacramento, California, and
nice
I have
place.
lived, in this area since about 1992.
Oh, very good. Very good. Yeah, I had, for work, visited there quite a lot and love going into old Sacramento.
Yeah, fun area.
Very, very, very cool time. All right. So I gave a very brief background, but I always like to know a little bit about the backstory, what brought you to where you are today. It's usually more than just a couple paths that you cross.
For sure. So I was one of those kids who every 6 months or every year had a different idea of what I wanted to do when I grew up. And it's like, it ranged from anything from like an architect to an airplane pilot, various other things. When I went to college, I had kind of dialed in that my dream thing would be to become a writer. But being a little bit more pragmatic, I also realized that might be hard. So I was planning to basically get an English degree and a chemistry degree, figuring, well, chemist was like a good, safe sort of thing. But if I could be a writer, cool. One semester of college proved to me I was not going to do either of those things. So I kind of, worked my way through college. I thought about a couple other things there, possibly attorney, gave up that one, and came out of college being like, I don't know what the heck I'm going to do. So that was kind of crazy. But then I worked into a career in IT, which I did for a few years, found it unfulfilling. That led to a early midlife-ish crisis, where I got some therapy, did some career counseling. And that led me finally to some clarity about becoming a psychotherapist, which is what I then went to school for, did that for a number of years before pivoting into the coaching. But the thing that really spoke to me about therapy and coaching was really being able to help and support people who had been under supported, who maybe hadn't been given the tools, the support, the resources that they needed to be able to do what they're capable of doing. That's something I could relate to because of some things in my background. And I really found that helping others to feel more empowered, more confident, more capable was really fulfilling. It was also something that I was good at. And so, along that way, it's just been a gradual refinement as I've done it to where I am now, which is, again, focusing in within the world of small business.
Wow, that's awesome. So you talked about giving people the tools, but what happens when you have people that don't want the tools, you know?
Well, I mean, I think it really comes down to starting with what people do want, right?
Yeah,
And
right.
then helping them explore how to get there. And
Yeah.
it's most adults don't like being told what to do by other adults. um,
Yes.
and that's not actually, often the way this goes, but there is a thing of asking people, well, how do you think you might be able to get there? Or what are the things you have tried? Or what are the things that you like doing? And then from there, working to explore, like, what are some paths that you could follow that might be of appeal or interest to you that would be more likely to be workable. But
Very good.
there's always difficulties along the way, though.
So oftentimes we hear people say that they're stuck in business,
Hmm.
stuck in their career, stuck in their as an entrepreneur. And so how do we get them unstuck?
Right. I mean, it's a great question, right? It's so one way we can look at it is basically if somebody is stuck, there is something in either they don't have enough force pushing them forward, or there's too much of a resistance or an obstacle
Mm,
to keep them from moving forward, right? So we can think of this as an energy equation of sorts. And it's about figuring out how do we shift the balance so that
mm,
the energy allows them to move forward. And that's a general answer, but that's because it can be any number of things.
yeah.
It may be, for example, maybe they're not really clear enough or compelled enough by where they're trying to go. If it's not a powerful enough mission for them, then they might not be interested in pushing through the obstacles. Maybe they don't believe they can overcome the obstacles that are in the way, or that they can't be overcome. And so maybe it's about helping them explore that and figure out, well, maybe actually, if you look at things differently or approach things differently, that might not be true. Maybe they have stories about themselves and who they are and who they aren't, and what they can or can't do that could fundamentally limit how they're able to go forward. And so it's an exploration. And this is one of the things that makes the work really interesting for me is everyone's unique and different. So we've got to unpack and figure out what's going on here and what are the things we need to move out of the way to allow them to get unstuck and move forward.
And I think it's interesting that you had chemistry as one of your previous ideas of what you wanted to do, because the brain and all that goes into it is just like a big chemistry project oftentimes. And I think
Yes.
a lot of especially my mom and dad and that generation in their that were born in the 30s and the 40s, um, when you talk about psychotherapy and therapy and all of those things that we today know how good it is to do, um, they think of being put in a home somewhere and lock the key and throw it away kind of thing. So how do you help people unpack that aspect of it, that it's okay to not um, be okay, if you will?
Right. Right. Thankfully, I think that it's a less of an obstacle today than it has been at times in the past. But certainly, one of the things that can get us very stuck is if we have this idea that there's something wrong with us,
Hmm.
right? Because we aren't doing a certain thing or don't think we can or whatever. And when we start to experience those feelings of shame, like some sense of fundamental defectiveness, it's hugely problematic because it gets in the way of us being able to look at it.
Yeah.
And so there's often, in cases like that, work needed to help explore and question and challenge that. And like, where does that idea come from that there's something wrong with me? What's that based on? Because it's
Hmm.
never actually based on anything that's got real substance to it. It's
Yeah.
based on, things we've seen elsewhere, things somebody said to us. But the truth is, everybody is imperfect. It's just part of being human. We all have
Yeah,
strengths, weaknesses, and flaws.
for
And
sure.
so if we can get people to look at that and to understand how what is connected to being successful, to being loved, to having connections and friends and things, has very little, in fact, nothing to do with perfection, and has a
Yeah.
lot more to do with humanness.
Mm.
They can start to become more comfortable with who they are and then start to find how are they a unique or special human that's a special combination of traits, strengths, challenges, what have you. And that allows them to be in the world in a way that will help them to stand out, which is a really useful thing in business for sure.
Yeah. And and I think too, you have your unstuck folks, and then you have people that overthink everything. They
Oh,
can't
yeah.
move forward because they're just overanalyzing. And so how do you help them?
Usually, if we're overthinking, it's some mix of, perfectionism and or fear. We're trying to
Yeah.
figure out like how do we do this, and how do we make sure that we get it all figured out so that it works and it goes right the first time.
Yeah.
And I mean, it'd be really cool if we could operate that way, but most of the time we can't. And so what we have to do is look at what's going on that's got you overthinking, like what's the trap that you're caught in there. And
Hmm.
often it's a matter of how are we going to take this thing and one, really get clear about the scope of what it is. Sometimes people get caught up in overthinking because they think, oh my God, if this goes wrong, it's going to be this really horrible outcome. Like, maybe, maybe not,
Maybe
probably
not.
not. But then two, this thing you're trying to do, maybe it's too big and maybe you need to shrink it down, right? Big
Yeah.
thinkers, the good thing about them is they have these really big, amazing ideas. The problem is they tend to often see how things interconnect and they tend to connect all the dots. And so something suddenly becomes huge. And it
Right.
kind of gets back to that whole thing that you hear about, like, how do you eat an elephant? Well, the answer is one bite at a time.
Yeah.
Not advising that people eat elephants, of course, but like it's really comes down to you've got to break it down. And so that's
Yeah.
really what it comes down to as we start looking at how do we take this thing and how do we make it smaller? How do we make it more manageable? Get it to that point where it's like, okay, that's a stretch, but it's doable, and then we go there and then build from there. So it's really about cutting it down to a more manageable size as a
Yeah.
starting point.
My husband was an artist, and when he uh, was teaching the kids in school, and inevitably there would be a handful would say, I can't draw. I have no talent. I can't draw. And he did just as you're saying to prove them wrong. He says, oh, you're only going to do an inch. You're in an inch square. You're going to take this piece and you're just going to do that 1 inch. And the person next to you is going to do the next inch. And then they put all those inch squares together and there's an art piece. And it does give you that sense of you don't have to have the whole picture, and it doesn't have to be perfect. And I think a lot of times we get stuck and we get probably overthink is because we're trying to not fail. We don't want to suffer the consequences of that. But like you said, a lot of times there's nothing to suffer. It's like, oh, well,
It's
what
not,
did you
yeah,
learn?
right. It's not a big deal. And also we sometimes get caught up and we're trying to create something that's not ours. So I'll use like art as an example, which is something I labored for years because I have a bunch of very artistic people in my family, and I labored for years under this idea that I didn't get the creative gene in the family. And while it's true that I'm not good at things like representational drawing or certain types of fine detail, because of actually a fine motor control disorder I had as a kid, that like I literally couldn't draw straight lines.
Mm,
But that doesn't mean I'm not creative. It doesn't mean I'm not artistic. But I
right.
had to, when as an adult, let go of that story. And what I did is I basically did a practice of practicing creating art and allowing myself to do the kind of art that I could create that I enjoyed, not trying to do a certain other thing, right? To
Awesome.
let my art emerge, which is more abstract in nature, and then started doing that as a practice. And it was really a way that I challenged some of my own beliefs about myself and really tested on that, and just eventually got to a point where it's like, no, I am creative. I'm differently creative
Nice.
from others in my family. It's not something I'm going to do to make a living, but got to a point where it's like I have sold art, so it's like
Hmm. Yeah.
apparently I am a little bit creative, I guess.
And, and having those creative juices is also a great stress reliever too. So,
Very. And that's, I mean, yeah. Creative activity of any kind is such a
Mhm.
powerful tool for self-care, which is a thing that I'm often talking with clients about, especially small
Yeah.
business owners who are always working a little harder than they might
Yeah.
ideally. But it's such a useful place to take some of your feelings and some of the energy that you have and redirect it into some other form. And it's a really kind of weird, it feels a little woo-woo, but a very useful way to take some of
Yeah.
that energy within you and to get it out. Much better than what we often try and do, right? Which is to numb them, ignore them, stuff
Yeah.
them in the trunk.
Yeah. That's right. So, so we talked about self-doubt, or I'm sorry, overthinking and unstuck, and that just leads us to self-doubt because a
Right.
lot of times we have the imposter syndrome. As I mentioned earlier, we are always trying to be perfect, especially if you are a small business owner, entrepreneur who needs to prove something. You have to prove that
Mm-hmm.
you can do this. You're not
Sure.
going to be that statistic, right? So talk to us a little bit about how we overcome our self-doubt.
I think we have to start, like so many of these things, we have to start small and build up from it is one piece. Another part is really looking, being able to take an honest look at things, right? We need to
Yeah.
understand where are our strengths, where are our weaknesses, where have we had successes, and where do we struggle,
Mhm.
and use that in constructing what we're going to try and do or how we're going to try and do that. Or if we want to do something different, then we have to really think about how we're going to go about building the skills. And we're not going to go from zero to expert,
Yeah.
right? And so it's often with things like self-doubt is it's what's an experiment we can run that we can try something, try it on a small scale, try it in a way that doesn't, put our business at risk, or financial stability at risk, and gather some data from it. We're going to learn
Mm.
something, and then we can iterate off of that, right? Make some tweaks, make some changes. And it's or the same thing with building a skill. If we're not good at something, let's try the thing, get some training, get some feedback on it, and continue to work on iterating our what we're doing and who we are. And that's how we get there. It's about not getting caught in that fixed mindset story of I can't do this,
Yeah.
I can't write, I can't speak, I'm not whatever, and finding a more useful growth mindset view, which might be I don't have great public speaking skills, but I can learn and I want to because it will serve
Mm.
me on this mission that I have. And then build a path, right, to go do those things and give ourselves permission also to be a beginner, to
Yeah.
be not good at stuff, which the further you get down the road of life is admittedly harder to do. It's definitely hard, to be like, oh my God, I don't know what I'm doing with this yet. But there's nothing wrong with that. Of course, you're a beginner if you haven't spent a lot of time and energy learning the thing.
Yeah. And everyone to keep on developing and evolving is always going to be at some point a beginner. If you
Totally.
stretch yourself to that next level, you're going to not know what you're doing. You're going to have to be learning and failing and testing and all those things. And that's what makes, I think, life interesting.
I think we have a false idea of how it's supposed to go. We're supposed to get to a point where, like, okay, we've got it all figured out and it's all now we get to coast. And it's like, you can coast, but one, it's boring. And two, it turns
Yes.
out the only way you coast is if you're going downhill. Or, basically if you want to have any momentum, and that's not good. But
No.
again, we have these associations with not being good at something as it meaning something about us other than I haven't put a lot of time and energy
Yeah.
and focused effort into getting good at the thing. Because the reality is anything you're willing to put that effort into, you can get better at and get to a point of
Mhm.
being at least competent at. Sure, you might not be world class at certain things. Doesn't matter. You don't need to be, or
Mhm.
even close, to be able to use that thing in a really powerful way or to be able to enjoy it.
Yeah, for sure. So what are some tips to becoming more confident in what we're doing?
I think, well, confidence is, people often say, right, I'm going to do this when I'm more confident. And it's backwards because,
That's right.
right, it's like that's the thing. It's because we think confidence is the answer, and it's not. Confidence is the byproduct of doing the thing and becoming more
Mhm.
comfortable with the thing. And so how we get to being more confident is we give ourselves permission to do stuff badly. We give ourselves permission to do
Yes.
things that are uncomfortable. And we also work on making it so it's not just a just do it thing, because we can push that too far. But what we have to find is these stretch zones. Do something that is uncomfortable, but not too uncomfortable. Number
Mhm.
one. And then number two, approach it and how you structure it and the expectations you make for yourself in a way that makes it easier. So if you haven't, for example, given a talk in public, well, don't go and try and, get some speaking
TED
thing in front
Talk.
of 100 people or a TED Talk, because it's like that's just huge. Instead, like, reach out to some local Rotary clubs, right? And
Mhm.
go do that, or some even go to your kid's classroom or some thing that's a small thing, number one. And then number two, be really careful about the expectation you set for yourself and the way you measure success for you. Because it might just be, I got up and I did the thing,
That's exactly right.
right? The first time. The second time, it might
Mhm.
be like, I did the thing a little bit better, or I did the thing and I only said 16 times instead of 100, or whatever it is. It doesn't matter. It's just about, like, you've got to recognize where you are and
Mhm.
work from there, and be careful about, again, setting yourself up for failure by being like, creating these ridiculous expectations of yourself.
Yeah.
And then also, it's real important just to look at and really be able to own your successes and your wins, which some of us have a hard time with. But really,
Yeah.
have got to be able to say, look, I did that thing. I did that thing well. I'm good at this thing. If we can't own our strengths, we're definitely going to struggle with our confidence.
Yeah, for sure. So, how do we overcome the fear of being judged by our fellow business owners, small entrepreneurs, or family?
I think we have to look at why judgment is so scary to us.
Yeah.
And I think, fundamentally, this relates to some brain stuff for us.
Yeah.
We do have a piece of our brain that is wired to see judgment or exclusion as inherently threatening to our safety. So there's a reason, like this kind of primitive reason that's there, but that doesn't mean it's actually legitimate in our world, right?
Right.
And I think if we start to look at, if we look at companies that are successful, things, products, ideas that are successful, they are not usually things that don't have, like, they have supporters and they have people who think it's a bad idea, right? And the thing is, if we want to be not judged, we are going to have to also make ourselves either invisible or
Mm.
unremarkable.
Yeah.
And while that might be a safe path for not getting judged, it's not a very good path for
Mm.
building connection, getting attention, or any of the things that we want.
Right.
But again, we need to understand that, like, judgment is not the big deal we think it is, especially in these contexts. I mean, obviously, if you're doing certain things, maybe it's a problem, but um, so we have to really go, like, what am I afraid of? And is that like it's not that it's not a legitimate fear, is like, is that really what's going to happen? Or how can I test that? And sometimes it's even about turning things from, I'm going to do this thing, or I want to do this thing, but I'm scared people are going to judge me, to, I'm going to do it as a trial or as an experiment. And when
Mm-hmm.
we do that, it allows us to put it out there in a way that's a little bit more tentative. And that makes it less scary, right? It's less
Mm.
vulnerable, because we're like, I just had this idea. I'm going to try it and see how it goes. And if we frame it like that, whatever happens, we can, deal with it. It's not a thing where we've, like, suddenly attached our identity to, this is what I'm going to do. And then when it doesn't
Mm-hmm.
work, things fall apart. And this is where you see people who have these aspirations for what they're going to do, and they get so attached to that as their identity. And if for some reason it doesn't work out, even out of their control, it
Yeah.
can be hugely problematic for them, because then they start to see themselves as a failure
Mm.
versus learning, I'm going to try this thing. It might work, it might not. And just
Yeah.
then do it and learn from there and refine it over time.
I found that whenever I was in my last several years of being a project manager, uh, a lot of the things that projects I was leading were things that hadn't been done before. And so, I spent a lot of my time trying to get everybody to just get rid of the old mindset of, if you do these steps and then it should work. It's like, no, we're going to do these steps to see if it's close to working and how can we could tweak it and learn from it and go on. But it's really difficult for some people to be able to accept that they're going to fail and learn from that. And, and I think
Especially,
the judgment comes in that too.
yeah. Well, if we, a lot of this also relates to if we're getting our sense of okayness from outside of us, it really feeds into all of this, because then it starts to become a problem. Like, if you don't approve of me, then I'm not okay.
Mm.
Instead of looking at it like, I am okay with who I am and okay with being an imperfect human who's a work in progress, because I like my good parts, and the parts that aren't so good, I'm working on. And if somebody doesn't like me, or if some, thing I try fails or whatever, that doesn't mean I'm a failure. It means that thing didn't work or that thing didn't fit. It's like, if we go to the store and try on a pair of jeans and they don't fit, we don't like take it as like there's something wrong with us. We just get a different size.
Yeah. Yeah.
But we can really get hooked into this stuff if we are thinking that that's what determines whether or not we're okay. But if we aren't at peace with and okay with ourselves and our humanness, it's going to create all kinds of chaos in our relational world, both personally and professionally, because there's going to be a lot of push pull and a lot of needs and expectations there that's just going to make things very messy.
Yeah. And there's sometimes, if you have the mindset, and, as an artist, you can have that too, where this is for me, I'm doing this for me. And there's a lot of different people out there, and some people may love it. Some people may hate it. Some people may, don't care. But as long as you start that it's you, that you're trying to have this piece of art, do something impact, then I think it's a good start.
I think there's a lot of things like that if we start by doing for ourselves, or coming from a place of we're focused there, it can definitely be helpful. And part of it's also about how are we going to figure out if something is going to work, or if something is going to have an audience without putting it out there. And again, this is where the overthinking starts coming in. We try and figure out, like, how do we do this without having any risk, without failing, without, being judged or any of this. And it's like, that just can't happen. And instead, what we have to do is, I think, one, develop a more realistic picture of how things work, and develop enough of a core sense of okayness, enough of a core support system that we're able to see these things differently, right? I'm going to do an experiment. I'm going to try this thing. I'm going to see what happens. I'm also going to set it up in a way where if I try it and it doesn't work, it isn't a huge problem.
Yeah.
Right? This is, again, the whole idea of like a minimum viable product is an example of that. And I think it's a smart sort of strategy that you can apply in a lot of ways, because it allows you to get some feedback at a fairly low risk, and to put things out there,
and have I don't know, thick enough skin to be able to accept that's not gonna work. And
I think, if we start to look around, we also, again, if we start to really look at others of any kind, not only people we know, close to us in our circle, but even we look at like people in the world, famous people, there's no one's perfect. They've all got their flaws. Or we look at things that we really love. Sometimes it's even the imperfection or the quirks that are part of what gives it appeal. Right? The thing I always tell people is, like, if you talk to perfectionists about this and you ask, like, so how is being a perfectionist working for your interpersonal side of your life? And it doesn't work well, because what happens is it just intimidates people.
Yeah, that's very true. Very true.
Right.
Well, time has flown by. I knew it would, but I just have a one rapid fire question. So my husband, who's upstairs exercising right now, will appreciate this. Star Wars or Star Trek? And what
Yes.
does it have to do with business? Love to hear
Okay.
that answer.
Yeah. Um, I am more of a Star Trek guy, but I think actually the answer could also be both.
Ah,
And especially as it relates to business, much as like, so with Star Trek, the thing I appreciate is that, there's just a lot of elements in it about possibility, about
mm,
understanding the power and merit of diversity. But one of the things I also especially like is how between Captain Kirk and Mr. Spock, what Gene Roddenberry really did and building those characters is took two of the fundamental parts of the human brain, the rational brain and the emotional
yeah.
brain, and split them out. And the thing we see in Star Trek again and again is they are best as a team. Either one of them
Oh,
by themselves has flaws. Kirk can be kind of hot-headed, does stupid things. Spock's a little too cold and analytical. You put them together and they're kind of unstoppable, right?
yeah.
And
Yeah.
so,
That's awesome.
so there's that on the Star Wars side, which again, it's not that I dislike one. I just like Star Trek better, but on Star Wars, we start thinking about the idea of the Force. And it's such, I think, a useful concept to think about. We do things happen, right? And we can think of that as a form of energy or a form of input that we
Right.
can take and we can use in any number of ways. We can use, for example, we try something, it doesn't work out. We can use that to say, I suck. I don't know what I'm doing. I should just go get a government job or whatever it is. Right? I should just, do this thing. And no offense to anybody who works for the government, to
Yeah.
be clear, at all. But it's like, I can't do this. I'm a failure. Or we could say, okay, how do I use this as an educational thing? What can I learn from this? What can I adjust? What can I change? Right. And we have a choice. And that's kind of the same thing with the Force, right? Do you
Yeah.
use it for good or bad?
Right.
And I think that's the thing is we're often moving so fast and we're moving so reactively in a world that wants us to do that because it's easier to
Right.
control or manipulate us if we are, that when we pause and think, we then can be intentional about what do I do with this, right?
Yeah.
With the feelings as an example, right? Do I, versus just being reactive to them, letting them drive, or stuffing them or numbing them, putting them in the trunk. And here it's like,
Yeah.
well, let me hang out with these for a bit. Let me get curious about them and let me see what do I do with this. And when we do, the same thing as the Force, very powerful.
Yeah. Very good. All right. Well, it's time now for me to share my screen. So for those that are just listening, you should run and get a paper and pencil if you haven't already done so. You know the drill. And all this will be on my YouTube channel. Please subscribe to Vicki Noethling, or you can go to findyourleadershipconfidence.com. It will be in the show notes. So those listening, it is the website of stevemccready.com. That's stevemccready.com, STEVE, and McCready is MCCREADY. All right. Instagram and LinkedIn. He was wonderful for you and he gave his name, Steve McCready. And YouTube is at Coach Steve M, at Coach Steve M on YouTube. I'm going to turn it over to Steve McCready to be able to tell you what his call to action is for y'all and what you can find when you go to that website.
Right. Yeah. So I want to encourage everyone to really um, try and not even so much to think bigger, but to try and connect to those big thoughts that you've had
Yeah.
about what matters to you and what you want to do in the world. And yeah, you can go check out my website. And one of the things you can get there, this is a new actually experiment that I've been doing. Speaking of experiments, is I've
Oh,
started doing a daily email on weekdays, and it's a short kind of it's intended to be short, easy to digest, and action oriented for you. So you'll be able
perfect.
to read it in probably less than a minute, often less than 30 seconds, because it's anything from a couple sentences to maybe at most a couple hundred words, and really just trying to give you some ideas and thoughts for what you can do to be
Hmm.
able to help yourself become more empowered, more capable to overcome some of those negative stories that are in your way and be able to move yourself forward in your life.
Awesome. All right. Again, the website is stevemccready.com. Well, Steve, it's been great chatting with you. I think that there were tons of good advice and tips for the folks out there today. And I do encourage everybody to go to Steve's website, check it out, see all the great things that he has there. Check out his LinkedIn and the YouTube to get those little snippets and take advantage of getting that newsletter or that daily email. Everybody needs a little inspiration every day. As
That's what
always,
I'm hoping.
I remind everyone that life is a journey and it's up to you to enjoy the ride. This is Vicki Noethling signing off.
Thank you for tuning into the Find Your Leadership Confidence podcast with Vicki Noethling, where we share impactful lessons that help you grow as an individual, grow your confidence, and find the positive and good within you so you powerfully and authentically become the best version of yourself. Remember to visit our website at www.findyourleadershipconfidence.com and enjoy even more great episodes like this one. Again, while you're here, subscribe to us via your favorite network. We look forward to seeing you next time on the Find Your Leadership Confidence podcast.